We're here with Thor and Georges, and our topic of the day is career self-implosion. One tweet could, wreck your career after a lifetime of building it up. So, why don't we get started?
Heck yeah. Yeah, right.
Right. Why don't we introduce ourselves and
Yes.
tell a little bit of what we've done?
By all means.
Awesome. Hey everybody, my name's Thor. I've been in the video game industry now for about 10 years. In that time, I've been a community manager. I'm currently a designer now. And part of that is working with the community, working with social media, and getting yelled at by people online, which I guess makes me qualified to kind of give a conversation about, some ways to avoid that. And yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Let's put this over here.
Hi, yeah, my name is Georges Genting. I'm a comic book artist. I've been in the business over 25 years, drawn for Marvel, DC, all the majors at some point or another. I'm probably best known for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Deadpool, Gambit, and recently, in the last 2 years, I've been doing a lot of the Star Wars titles, not the least of which are The Mandalorian, the Ahsoka series, and Mace Windu.
Wow.
Do you have a particular comic that you're proud of? Like one of your top?
I mean, that's like saying, what kid do you like the best? So it's always difficult to say that. And while I may have one, just the current project that I'm on, I mean, I did enjoy Buffy because that was a very lucrative and I spent almost 10 years drawing it. So it was a very nice time in my life. There are a bunch of other titles that are a little more special probably to me because of what they were speaking of. But yeah, it was a gas doing Buffy.
Nice. Amazing.
Nice. Speaking of Buffy, weirdly enough, we go to a coffee shop called Ground and Pound, and the stunt actor for the main Buffy girl actually works there. That's like her coffee. So we have we go to coffee. There's Buffy the Vampire Slayer stuff everywhere.
Here in Atlanta?
Yes, here in Atlanta at all the places.
Pound?
Ground and Pound coffee, and then of course, Power Rangers as well. So
That sounds like an adult film company.
a little bit. It does. Come on, get your Ground and Pound here. So hey, I love it.
Well, this conversation's great.
Knock that water out.
Yeah, I know.
I thought I stand.
Okay.
And I could just
That
hand
works.
it up.
Whatever is easiest for you, my friend.
Just remember, the camera doesn't move.
That's fine. This is
Oh,
about
it's
you
not
guys,
important.
and I'm just kind of here to help facilitate, conversation.
All right.
Sorry. Again, first time moderating a panel here.
Well, now they know it too. Shh, that's a secret.
All right. So, do you have any career advice that you'd want to give to potential authors, illustrators, producers, things like that? Just like a good place you'd want to, point in the direction and say, hey, if you want to get into this career, start here, start there, or maybe you just, happen upon it. So maybe get some insight on how all that goes.
Ooh, okay. First of all, I'm so excited to get into your work. I love Star Wars. Everything you rattled off there, I was like, oh, I'm a huge fan of the old school Star Wars and all the. Wow, that's cool. I'm excited to get into what you work on. So it's we do a very personal thing. We work in geek culture, and people are very passionate about certain things when it comes to geek culture. So I particularly work with video gamers, and they're very well known for being rational. Or no, they're not. They yell and scream and everything. So it's been a pretty good journey of seeing what works when it comes to communicating with those kind of different audiences. I'm sure you work with people who are very spirited about the medium, right? So it's like, Mace Windu is this kind of character, and if you change something, I'm sure you'd be having a lot of backlash coming your way. So super excited to see what you talk about with that. For me, though, especially with social media, it's about finding your voice, and that's really helped me kind of align on how I communicate with the outward population. So for me, I am me, and I'm goofy, I am honest, and that's helped me for sure when it comes to working with gamers. And so oftentimes I think people, when gaming is involved, they get put into a front wall of EA, Microsoft. It's like talking to a corporate wall.
Yeah.
And so I've always tried, me personally, to sign my tweets, or because we were talking about tweets, and I'll sign if I am on a corporate account for this, and be like, hey, this is my tweet. I'm owning this, right? And that has alleviated a lot of that kind of pressure, right? And so people like to feel like they're actually being talked to and not talking to a wall. And so that's helped me along my ways for sure. And I'm curious to see what you have to say.
About getting into the business and all that good stuff?
Yeah, just
Or,
getting started, you know, any advice you want to give?
The advice I would give you today wouldn't have been the advice I gave you 10 years ago, because the print medium has changed so much just in the last 10 years. The whole reason anybody would grow up and want to work for a Marvel or a DC was because obviously they published certain characters that you wanted to draw, but they were a publishing house. And back in the day, it was too expensive for you to publish your own book. Now, of course, that's not the case. It's actually very cheap. You can publish your own book, and if you do it right, you can crowdfund it and have other people pay for publishing your own book. So I tell people now who want to get into this business, I ask them, if you have a love for drawing Spider-Man or Superman or Batman or whoever, then try and break into the business, sure. But if you just want to do comics, you want to do your own stuff, you don't need the big publishers anymore, because that's all they could give you is a publishing platform, which you no longer need. If you do it right, your own Instagram, your own Twitter or X, you could probably crowdfund something that would pay you more than you were working at Marvel or DC. So honestly, you just don't need it anymore. Again, if somebody really wanted those characters, I'd say go into it. But nowadays, I'd tell them, don't bother, really.
Okay, yeah. So this is a question specifically for George's. What's it like working with hand-drawn versus digitally drawing characters, pages, things like that? Like, what would be the biggest difference?
Honestly, I hate to say I don't have a whole answer to that, because I don't work digitally. I'm still what they call hard copy these days. I do color on computer. I use Photoshop for that. But Again, I've been in the business so long. You get used to working a certain way, and honestly, it suits me, and I'm comfortable with it. So I never felt a need to. I get the argument, because a lot of people say, well, you can work faster, or you can work quicker, or you can work anywhere you want, and all of these are true. But I really would like to hear somebody who's working in the business where they go for their 9 to 5. Because comics technically are my 9 to 5. When you go off to work, you sit in an office in a cubicle or whatever, you do what you do. I essentially do the same thing, only it's my spare bedroom, and some people it's their basement, wherever it is you go. And that's what I do from my 9 to 5. So I don't know a whole lot of people who would want to take their job with them while they're traveling, or do their job while they're traveling, those things. And I'm very much the same way. I love to draw, but I will take the time to say Monday through Friday, maybe Saturday, whatever, this is where I am, 9 to 5, and it's closer to 8 to 7, to be honest. This is what I'm doing for that time. So the digital medium doesn't really benefit me, or I haven't seen a benefit where it would suit me to transfer there, because what I'm doing, I leave time for it. And I think that's the biggest thing a lot of people I run into. They don't allocate the time that they work. And I'm always curious, what else would you want to be doing? If you love artwork, wouldn't you be doing, because you always say, oh, I do this for free, even if nobody paid me. So I'm always curious, why would you want to rush through it when it is the journey, not the destination, that is so fulfilling?
Yeah.
I'm always curious. And I'm not as big on Twitter. I'm all over Instagram, so I don't know the ins and outs of Twitter if you're going in that direction. But I can definitely talk about Instagram or Facebook.
Well, we can talk about Instagram if you'd like.
You're moderating this thing, you lead it.
All right. I love the confidence. So I imagine for drawing specifically, it's that feeling of having the actual pen on the paper.
Yeah.
That it's just comfortable.
Just like reading a book. Some people say I prefer to turn the pages.
It's nice to have that physical, like,
The smell of the book.
Smell of a good book.
The smell of the book, the feeling of like the pages.
Sure.
I don't know if that's just a me thing or.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's a preference. There's no good or bad way of saying, hey, if you like digital, then go digital. That's great.
Yeah. I think there's like a happy medium between the two.
Sure.
So another question then. So we can get more into the topic at hand here. Has anybody experienced some amount of controversy that they'd be willing to talk about?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you like to take the floor?
Sure, I can take this one. Yeah, so I used to, as a community manager, it's interesting. Oftentimes, a community manager will do a lot of stuff on social media, whether it's Twitter. If the company's big enough, they'll hire their own like social media expert, and that handles Twitter as well. Oftentimes, a community manager has to be told to do everything. It's like, yeah, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing. Like, I didn't go to school for social media, Twitter, and all that kind of stuff. So I had released a patch for a video game, and it went over very, very well, but there's always going to be detractors. And if you buff a fireball by like 20 points, there's always going to be somebody that you should have nerfed that fireball by 20 points, not buffed it, you idiot, what are you doing? And so every single day I would have somebody on Twitter just be like, hey, this is day 2 of telling you that you're an idiot and you should have nerfed the fireball. And it got to the point where it's just relentless, like whether it was like Facebook, Twitter. So finally I was like, you know what, I'm just going to like have fun with this, right? So I at first approached it as in like, hey, let's do the data, right? And so I broke it down as far as letting the data speak to me. It's like, these are the 5 points of data that tells me that I should nerf the fireball. Number 1, mages are doing too much damage when it comes to like by a wide margin. Out of a sample size of 100, these show that mages, when they're in this game, they're doing X amount of DPS. I know I'm throwing a lot of words at you, but that was like 1 point of data. Then I hit so many other points of data as far as deaths, kills, and all that kind of stuff. He didn't like that very much. He's like, I don't care about the data. I feel in my heart of heart, right? And so by confronting this person and using data as an example of being like, hey, this is my shield, so to speak, and he just started looking worse and worse and evolving his criticisms into just, you know what, I can't yell at him for nerfing the fireball, so you're just an idiot. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, tomorrow, what's Tuesday? Well, you're ugly. I'm like, all right, I'm ugly, man. So, and then finally he was like, and you could see his screen name, and so I happened to notice the screen name was also his login name when it came to like actually playing the game. And he's like, oh, well, you're a stupid idiot, and you shouldn't have nerfed the fireball. I'm like, well, actually, I can tell it here, and I brought his account up. I was like, you haven't played in the last 3 months, so I find it curious why you're yelling at me every single day when you haven't even played the game in 3 months. And at that point, it just shut down the conversation, and he walked away. So I felt pretty good about that one, for sure. But through that, I learned a couple different things. Number 1, using the points of data to be a shield, right? You're not always going to be right. I'm not right often, in fact. But when you make a decision, show and explain why you made those decisions there. It wasn't just taking something out of the hat and be like, I want to nerf the fireball because it's a Tuesday, and that helped me a lot. And then again, going back to my voice, right? I'm very snarky, very silly, very, you've seen Wendy, or you've heard of Wendy's on Twitter, right? They always are making cracking jokes and stuff like that. Me, I'm just myself, and I sign my tweets, and I'm like, I did this, Forrest did this, Thor did this, and so you can yell at me because I did it, but here's the reasons, and that helped me a lot. But coming on to you, I was like...
Well, I'm curious, nerf the fireball is what?
Yeah, so nerfing the fireball. So in games, right? So let's say, are you familiar with any type of games?
No,
okay. What's the last game?
That old.
Okay, what's the last game you played?
Super Mario? I think Frogger.
Frogger. Okay. So in Frogger, when a car runs over, it kills you instantly. Of course. So let's say in a world where the car didn't kill you instantly, or where you say Frogger's too hard. So I feel like the car shouldn't kill you in one hit. You should be able to get hit with 2 cars before. And so that is an example of nerfing something, right? So you're reducing the power of that car and making it easier to play the game. So in this instance, I had the player was throwing fireballs and doing damage to other people. I had made that not as powerful. I nerfed the car, I nerfed the fireball, and he wasn't too happy about that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, gotcha. And what was the question?
You were a controversial moment in your life that you had to navigate around.
I mean, I had a censor. I don't know if that's controversial. I did have to be censored for. I didn't write the story, but I drew the story. I actually wrote the story with Paul Jenkins, who was here at some point, and we were just censored. It wasn't so much the fact that we were censored as it was they just didn't say anything. And I think that really that's more of a bone of contention with people. Because really censorship is just criticism. This is, I don't like this, or I don't think it should be this way. Right. Therefore, we are either putting an X over it, or covering it up, or doing whatever. I think most people are okay with that if you approach them. And in this case, Paul and I, we heard about it just after the fact, and we thought, well, that's not cool. So it really got away from the fact that we were censored to the fact that nobody said anything to us. Beyond that, I've never really, I mean, I also am very one to speak my mind. I'm very visible. I always sign my name to whatever. I never hide behind any anonymity. So I think, and I hate this term, but living your best life is the way to go, because at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't like you, they're not going to like you. That's just period. So you could be the happiest person, you could heal the crippled children in South Africa or whatever, but they're still not going to like you, and not everyone is going to like you, and that's okay. You don't need everyone to like you, you don't need everyone's approval. And I think the internet is very much comprised of people who feel vindication through either putting somebody down, like what you were saying, or trying to get built up in terms of how many followers do I have, or how popular is this, or how far can I go with it. And I don't think it's come to a head yet, but it's very interesting to see that social media, how it is now shaping who we are, as opposed to the other way around, because we're no longer individuals until we get the approval from social media these days, it seems. And I know I'm speaking more like a Black Mirror episode or something like that, but the idea is sound, and I think we are slowly going to that point where we can't define ourselves until others define us. And
Right.
it should never be that way.
So is there like a hive mind kind of thing almost? Is
Very
that
much, yeah. I think all the clicks and the likes and the loves and all that, that's very much a hive mentality. And if you've got 10 likes as opposed to 15,000 likes, it makes you feel like, wow, I've got all these people got my back and something. Like, no, you don't. They just like what you do.
I'm right, look how many likes I have here.
You know, yeah, or I'm such a good person because of all these likes I got. And you're like, this is an odd definition of your character because they don't even know you. They may have liked a quote you might have said or a repost of something you might have done, but they don't know you. So I find it hard to feel that censorship affects you. I know they're very sort of, not weak, but very influential people, but I've always found it hard that censorship like that could affect you.
Could you go into a little more detail of what you got censored about? Was it the language, the art?
Yeah, well, it was the art, ultimately, because I was involved. We were doing, Paul and I, the characters, it was a group back in the day called Wildstorm, through Image Comics. And in it, we were doing one of the, the Planetary. Was it Planetary? Or who was, they had a big title. They basically, their version of the Avengers. And I can't remember now because this was almost 20 years ago. God, it'll hit me later too. Anyway, there was a character called the Engineer, and she drove the ship, which is an exaggerated way of saying she drove the Enterprise. She was linked to the Enterprise. And Paul had this really funny idea that, well, what does she do on her downtime? Because she was part machine, she was more or less a cyborg, but it was fluid, more T-1000 instead of a T-800.
Right.
Gotcha.
She was more fluid in that sense. So, and he thought, well, what does she do on her downtime? Like, you know, when she's not flying the ship or saving the world with all of that. And so we started to delve in that because he and I got together and we just started throwing out ideas. And that, well, maybe she likes to just go to a bar, like everybody, or maybe she likes to just get a drink, like, you know, people do.
Yeah.
And as he's going, if you know Paul Jenkins, his mentality is warped to begin with, in a great way. Then he thought, well, maybe she has preferences, like maybe she just likes, you know, a certain kind of a guy, and maybe she just likes, you know, little Mexican men, and that's her thing, like that's her trope. She wants that, and the story evolved to there, where she on her off day, just like, you know, when you're throwing out ideas, you're like, damn, we're writing the story and we didn't even realize it. On her off day, she goes down to Earth. She goes to a bar, maybe in Nevada or New Mexico or someplace there, and she picks up, you know, there are a couple of Mexican gentlemen there. She picks up a little Mexican guy, takes him back to the hotel because, you know, she's got some tension she wants to relieve.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you see where I'm going with
Yeah.
censorship.
No, I don't know.
Might have come into this. So, you know, it's just a one-night stand type of a thing. And Paul, again, to his credit, that when she orgasms, since she's liquid metal, she kind of explodes in a way that all of her metal kind of, and this, of course, scares the poor little Mexican man who's thinking he's getting lucky. And all of this, we drew it Well, the splooge part, because it's not offensive when you're taking it out of context, because there's no penis, there's no semen, there's nothing to say, no, you can't show that.
Sure.
There's just this fictional character, and you're like, what the hell is she doing? When you're reading the story, you totally understand it. And within the context of the story, we drew it that way, and her big thing, and this was tell you how old this is, her big thing was when they're both about to orgasm, she wants her men to say, "Yo quiero Taco Bell," because that was their tagline for so many years.
That's 90s life for sure.
And that's how, long ago they did this. And so she's like, dude, say it. And, she'd say, he'd say, "Yo quiero Taco Bell." And funny, nobody thought it was offensive to Mexicans because we weren't disparaging them at all. But the idea that the guy was naked as he's running away from her, because of course, if he was having sex with somebody and all of a sudden they exploded, you probably wouldn't stick around to see what the body looked like. That he was naked, and there was something about the piece of underwear that he had. And all of that, when we saw it printed, he had shorts. He wasn't naked anymore. He had shorts, and the piece of offending underwear was already covered up. So censored in that way, but again, if they had approached us, we could have said, well, you know what, let's redraw this page, or we want to do these 2 panels over, or something like that, and we never had the opportunity. So that was, I wouldn't say controversial, it definitely pissed Paul off a lot more than it did me, because he was like, screw it, I'm never going to work for them again, he's very extreme. So yeah, that censorship was there, but again, I think most censorship can be avoided if you just approach the offending issue.
Yes. So I did want to ask another question, going back to the internet hi-fi thing. How much of that has, between when you first started and, the modern age where everything is available instantly, how would you say that's kind of shapes the trajectory of your work?
Well, I think that works with gaming also.
With gaming,
Oh, that's interesting. That's both like on a personal level and so I think for our generation, and I'm going to put ourselves in the generation if I can, the generation that used to get yelled at. So for me,
because my generation, we didn't even have a computer.
Yeah.
I was trying to do all this stuff.
You had pen and paper.
Yeah. So I still remember very vividly where we'd have to get directions. And it started off with the map, and then past that, you'd have to get directions from MapQuest, and you have to print them out on you go to Yahoo, and this is late 90s, and if you forgot the directions in the printer, you were in a lot of trouble. And I've done that multiple times. I think the core of me, and I would venture for you, was really solidified before the internet, and I definitely have pieces of that. But for me, getting to grow up on cartoons, whether it was Space Ghost, whether it was older ones, and I can just rattle off every single cat dog. I have so many commercials in the 90s and Toonami and comic books in there, and that was kind of my makeup. And so I often see now, though, is that the internet is that hive mind in a lot of ways, and so you'll have a lot of people who think the same way because a certain person said on, YouTube or Twitter or Twitch and stuff like that, and they latch onto that. And so it's been so enlightening to me to see that kind of just that hive mind that you referred to earlier, and I'm just very thankful. And I'm nowhere near perfect, but I definitely can see where my DNA / the weave, the tapestry that makes up me as a person, is not on the internet, it's not TikTok, and I see so much of it this day and age with the new generation, and I probably sound like somebody on a porch, and you're like, for sure, but I think it's sad a little bit as well. I do, I really, really do, because you kind of touched on something earlier, that the validation through likes and hearts and all that kind of stuff, and I do find that to be really sad. So, but like everything, it's a pendulum. Maybe it'll swing back another way, and we'll be hopefully live long enough to see it kind of go another way. So I'm excited.
Well, let's hope. To me, honestly, the only thing or the biggest difference I can see with having things accessible right away, and the way it was when I was still trying to make it, not the only advantage, but probably the biggest advantage, and I speak as an artist on this level, when I was trying to break in, there still wasn't the internet. I guess the internet was there, it just wasn't for commercial use yet. When I got a gig, or if I had a job, or something that required me to draw, I would have to go to the library and check out books of hopefully picture books of that, whatever it was I was doing. Like, I had one story where it took place on a nuclear power plant. And I don't know, two superheroes were fighting, and there was a meltdown, and of course, they wanted to save, whatever. But again, pre-internet, where do you go for that? Like, okay, well, what does that look like? What does a power plant look like? And sure, now you just take out your phone and you go, nuclear power plant. They're like, well, where would you like this power plant, or which one would you like? I had to go to the library, and I have to say, that was a whole day adventure, because you get your list, and you knew you were going to spend the whole day there just trying to dig for these things. And it was fun to do that, because I set time aside for that. But that, to me, I see people now, and I'm reminiscent about times where, like, dude, I spent a whole day in the library doing what you just did in 2 seconds.
Have you ever wanted to go back and do that process again? Just go to a library?
I don't know. Who would want to do that? I mean, I can see going to the library just to do it, but why would I do it when I've got it right here and I need it? I need that reference, and it'll give me 100 pictures. I was lucky if I were to find a book on on nuclear fusion or something, it would never necessarily be on the book. Because, you want to draw tigers, 100 books. You want to draw, other things, there's probably a bunch. It's those obscure things where you're like, maybe there's a picture in here, or maybe there's a reference there, or an article that had a photo accompanying it. But for the most part, a lot of those more obscure things were so hard to get. And I thank God for the computer when it comes down to that, because I love the idea that I'm a very detail-oriented artist. All of my work on Star Wars, this is probably the beauty about Star Wars. When you do work for Star Wars, they have their own library, and you have access to it on the computer. Of course, everything is watermarked with your name, so if anything leaks, they know exactly where it was that leaked. So you even have to tell your friends, you can look at this, but don't download anything, because it'll come back that Georges Genti, it'll say Georges Genti, watermark, this, and this. And anybody who's registered to it, it'll say their name on there. So you really have to be careful in that respect, but otherwise you can see everything Star Wars ever had in their universe, whatever you're interested in. If you want to know the ins and outs of the Millennium Falcon, they have thousands of photographs to say, well, what part? Where was what? The engine, the inside, the cockpit, all of that stuff. And that is beautiful, because again, I'm a very detail-oriented artist. The more I tell people, the more detail you give me, the better it's going to look, because the more authentic it will look. And all that stuff, I think, is a godsend from the computer. Obviously, there's pros and cons, but to me, that is the biggest con. The computer has given to me. I mean, yes, I can FaceTime with my nephews, or all the sentimental things. I can talk to people in Australia now instantly, things like that, sure. But as an artist, like I said, that's probably the most proficient thing I have with the computer.
Right. So what was it like working on the Star Wars comics? Because I know Star Wars is like a huge cultural thing right now.
Yeah, it's got some heat behind it.
It's got some heat behind
A
it.
little bit. I mean, and I'm sure, like everybody, when I was a kid, I loved Star Wars. I mean, it couldn't be part of your life in some way as a child. Certainly as a child, I was 6 in 77, so going to see the first Star Wars and all that, amazing. And then even there, that's a great transition. Even at that time, the only photographs or the only outside influence we had of Star Wars, other than going to see the movie, and of course you can only see a movie for as long as it's out, because once Star Wars left, there was no DVD, there was no internet, there was none of that stuff. You had to rely on the comic books, for one. You had to rely on the magazines. You had to rely on all of these other photo reference things if you wanted that universe. And certainly, you could say, oh my God, that Millennium Falcon looked amazing in the movie. But after the movie's gone, like, well, I really want to draw the Millennium Falcon. But it's almost like saying, describe that person you were just with. Give him every detail you can think of. You can probably think of quite a few, but there'll be other details you totally missed once you see that person again. The same with that. If you're drawing the Millennium Falcon, and it killed me, a friend of mine in high school, because we really started drawing when Return of the Jedi came out, because I just started getting into high school. He had a photographic memory, and oh my God, I hated this guy, because he could just go watch the movie, and it was like, And he knew how to draw the Millennium Falcon, and here I am looking like, damn it, I don't know how to do this.
That's great.
So it's great if you're like that. I know a lot of artists who are like, well, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm like, no, I got my own style. I got my own this. I would say, well, you're probably not going to draw Star Wars because they really want the Falcon to look like the Falcon, or the X-Wing to look like the X-Wing, or Luke to look like Luke, and Han to look like Han. So if you deviate too much, there will be notes, and you will have to redraw things. So I would definitely not encourage somebody who just wants to do their own thing to enter into that machine that is Star Wars, because as much as you love it, it is a machine, and you have to fall into that machine. You can't say, no, I'm going to build my own section of this machine. No, you can't. This all has to be approved, and there are so many eyes looking on it, more than you think, that it's a conglomerate for a reason. It's not just a haphazard thing.
So there's just a bunch of like people in Lucasfilm looking up and down.
I can only say from my experience, and my experiences are with the comic books. I have the editors at Marvel, because Star Wars is published through Marvel Comics.
Right.
Obviously, Marvel Comics is owned by Disney, and Star Wars is owned by Disney. So there's that triangle, the pyramid, where, yes, at the top there's this, but my dealings, I deal with my editor, and then the editors send it to Lucasfilm, and then Lucasfilm looks at whatever it is I've done, and then they'll give notes. And some of those notes are the most tedious things. Like, there are a few tears in your jacket.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't get all those tears correctly,
Yeah.
if you were a character in the Star Wars universe, I would have gotten a note. You know, there's another tear on his shoulder. We're going to need to see that. Or there's this, and there's just these silly things that you and I, enjoying the comic book, probably never would have figured out.
Right.
But for them, there is somebody there, I don't know, and I think they don't tell you who it is on purpose, because he would probably get some hate mail from all the things he asks you to change. But yeah, there is that person that they do, because it is such a huge thing that they make sure that there's quality control.
Nice.
So if you like draw like a buckle wrong on
Yeah.
Han Solo's shoe, they'll be like, nope, that's got to be
Yeah.
it's got to be beveled or whatever.
And more than that, because every time they're like, well, this character hasn't been seen, so you can create what you want.
Yeah.
You have to follow. The Star Wars universe has a pattern that you have to follow. There are no zippers in Star Wars. I didn't know this. There are no buttons in Star Wars. Look at any of the Star Wars characters. Legit Star Wars, not something fan-related or whatever. If you look at that, you'll see there are no zippers and there are no buttons on whatever the design is.
So like the Jedi robes, it's all like I guess sashes and belts and things.
And it's
like
that way for a reason, because that is the architect of Star Wars. That's how they see themselves. Very much in the same way that you look at Star Trek. They have a very different way of their ships and their clothing and all of that follows a certain format as well.
Yeah. Are there any other odds and ends and tidbits of like the Star Wars
You're just
designs?
into Star Wars, aren't you?
We're all
Those
talking.
Curly blood stripes are going to draw themselves.
I don't want to stand Star Wars forever, but I am curious. 'Cause
No, I love it. I'm doing it because I love it.
Yeah, they're like you go to the parks. There's like you go to the theme parks. There's like a certain design and feel.
Yeah, and that's intentional.
Yeah. So are there any interesting odds and ends and tidbits of what you have to keep in mind for when you're designing something new, like a new setting?
Again, really, because I've done a couple of the characters now that I've done it. I think I did a Sith Lord for the High Republic, which I did before all of the others. And then I designed I think she was Corellian, but she was kind of a Han Solo, but a female version, and she was a smuggler and whatever. And I designed her look and her clothing, and they wanted her to be African American. So it was very intentional of me to say, well, it seems braids. It's almost like a cliche to say, oh, she's got, dreadlocks, or she's got braids.
Right.
But to do something interesting that, like you're saying, would fit in the Star Wars universe, as opposed to saying, oh, I saw that girl at Bloomingdale's or something. That is something where you have to really look at it and go, okay, here I have an African American smuggler. How do I make her look like she's in the Star Wars universe?
Right.
So I went through a bunch of variations, and then they eventually proved one. But yeah, it was an intentional thing to say, no zippers, no buttons, and they even have a whole list of things. When you're designing Star Wars characters, this is what to keep in mind.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I have a question for Thor now.
Ooh.
You talked about balancing games like with the fireball, it can't be powerful enough, or maybe it's too powerful, this, that. What's the balancing process like? And how just tedious could it be to get those details in the field to be exactly right?
Yeah, by the way, as somebody who read almost every single Star Wars book from like 1988 to 2008, I have such a love. Oh my god,
We can keep talking about Star Wars.
Jaina Solo, Jason Solo, all of you. Okay, anyways, that's a good question. So going back previously to the hive mind question, one thing that I had to iterate here is that oftentimes, and I get it, people think they can do your job better than you. In some cases, probably they could. And so I remember one case where this very big influencer was playing our game. He's like, I would do this, like this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Yeah, this sniper rifle hits way too hard and like too much damage. And I finally was like, okay, cool. Let's meet after this, whatever, and let's get what you thought, right? So I brought him in, and I brought a couple big, not celebrities, but high-profile broadcasters, Twitch, to come in and try to say, hey, what would you do in my scene? And at first, they were like, yeah, this will be easy. Then they sat down, and then they started talking numbers, and they're like, what do you think, Thor? What would you do here? I'm like, that's not what we're doing here. You said you could do my job better than I could, so I'm here just to hang out, right? And so, over the course of, a couple months, they kind of got comfortable and started doing stuff. And I'll never forget it one time. I brought in a lot of these people to kind of, commentate and all that kind of stuff. And then the patch comes out, and they're like, well, I told Thor to nerf it by about 90. And I'm like, you guys did not. So, but anyways, to your original point of what goes into balancing. A younger me would have said numbers, spreadsheets, formulas, and breakpoints, and all things that go into that. And there's very much a school of thought where feelings aren't really like, oh, this fireball feels very strong, or the lightsaber is just too strong here. And I definitely was on that camp where like, let's use data and all that kind of stuff. I quickly found out that fun is the capital F in this equation, and I've said the story multiple times, but really what's fun for the player, and that is where I find myself becoming a better designer. Right. Because I've seen a world where if you know at chess, and chess is probably a bad example because they're always finding new strategies with chess and stuff like that. You can't just be like, hey, if I memorize these 10 strategies in chess, I will be a chess master. I will always be the best player. That's not how that plays out. But when it comes to making a game, sometimes what can surprise and delight the player is also very, very, very powerful. And so if a person finds something about the gun or the lightsaber, or in the case of Star Wars, or something that they're not usually able to do, that makes them super excited and super awesome and super happy. And sometimes being overpowered, and that's where the truck is able to kill all the frogs, right? And that's a good feeling sometimes. Like, yeah, I was able to destroy everybody. That's awesome. And giving those people that power to feel that feeling of like, I'm a god. I'm like, I'm that hero in that story, has been something that, maybe 4 plus 4 doesn't have to equal 8. Maybe 4 plus 4 equals 2,790, right? It doesn't make sense, but then they found that answer, and they're like, that was fun. And so that's something I really kind of discovered. It was great.
Yeah, there was a level in Infamous 2 where, have you played that game?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so you remember that part of the game where you're towards the end, you're going up the ice castle thing, and you can just, there's a thunderstorm, so you can just siphon electricity out of the storm.
Exactly, and you just feel like a god.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So Thunder God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much.
Yeah, for sure.
So is it easier or harder? Well, I imagine it's probably more difficult to balance multiplayer games.
Yeah, you got more people yelling at you, for sure.
Yeah, especially with the complexities. You want to make it fun for everybody. Something like Smash Bros, for example. Like if you were to give Mario a stronger kick, it somehow affects, I don't know, Zelda in some unknown way, and that's why balancing that game would be difficult. Is there anything you want to comment on in that regard?
Yeah. So first of all, live service games, or games that back in our day, you'd make a game and like you'd shoot it out, and that's it, right? And it doesn't have updates, it doesn't have patches, it doesn't have anything else. What you see is what you get. You download it or whatever, you pick it up at the store, that's the game in perpetuity. Now, with live services, you have patches, you have a season, you have what is true today may not be true in 3 months, and that's both a blessing and a curse. So in that example that you gave with Mario, like, oh, we have taken our data, we've seen Mario is actually the least played character, and nobody's playing Mario anymore. Mario sucks, we haven't seen him in a tournament for like 3 years, right? So those are all good data points to be saying, you know, let's make Mario a little bit stronger.
Right.
And that helps us, that's really good. And I think with a game that has teeth, that lives a lot longer, you can do kind of those like ever-blooming patches. And World of Warcraft does that, League of Legends does that, Apex does that, every live service does that. And in fact, in some ways that brings players back to the game. Because if you happen to play Mario, Mario's your favorite character, you're probably not going to want to have 3 years of you having the worst character, right? And that's not a good feeling. So in some ways, I'd be like, hey, patch 2.8 is coming. You have Mario 2.0, right? And I guess people are excited about Mario again. But it's interesting. I've seen examples of people nerfing the worst character and people buffing the best character.
Oh, yeah.
And my old design director told me that he used to do that for Smite, and gave me reasons why and all that kind of stuff. And there's so many things that play into both on the feel side of thing. Like say a character has 3 different abilities, and that ability, one of the abilities is just really hard to use. And so it's like, but it's also the most powerful ability that the character has.
Right.
Well, for the average player, they're not going to be able to use that ability to any equation, right? So saying, okay, well, technically he's the worst character, but let's nerf him a little bit because of that one scenario. So there's a lot of nuances to it, for sure. There's a lot of nuances to it, and you're never going to get it right. And so luckily with multiplayer games, and especially in the live service game, you're going to get another shot at it. And so no king rules forever is a quote from World of Warcraft, and I still hold by that when it comes to multiplayer games. You know, those changing and all that kind of stuff can make the game be living, it's breathing, and so it's a fun facet to that.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's okay. So, how long have you been doing game? Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been in the industry for 10 years, but I've been a designer for only about 5 years. So,
Okay.
yeah, I started off as a community manager, getting yelled at. So, and you know, as a community manager, I deal with community. Like, I can do it better than you. And I was like, yeah, you know, maybe I'll get into design. And I like balancing stuff like that. And then I realized very quickly it's a hard job for sure.
Oh, no doubt. Do you think that it would have been harder? Because from your time, we've always had the ability to, you know, patch things, to include these like balance changes and things like that. Would it have been significantly harder in a time before that, like for fighting games, like Super Smash Bros. Brawl, for example, how they created Meta Knight and he was so high up the tier list that he was panned basically everywhere. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on what the balancing process would be like for pre-patch games.
So let's go back in the past, and I'm sure you were just young enough for the 80s and the 90s to have like arcades and all that kind of stuff. And that is such a different vibe, right? You mentioned like, so I want to throw it out at like Marvel vs. Capcom like 1 and 2. When that game came out, right, that was it. Japan, Sega had that, you know, this is our time, we'll release this game, and there's characters that are super broken in that game.
Right.
But what I found super interesting is that when you go to those arcades and you have the people that go there every single day, they're like, Bob, what are you doing? You can't play that character. That's an established rule. Everybody knows that character's broken, and that character will be broken for the end of the time. So if we have a tournament, Bob, we're not playing Wolverine, right? That is established lore, and that gets around to the other arcades in the 80s and the 90s and stuff like that. So you just know if you're going to a Marvel vs. Capcom 2, you're not going to play Cyclops because it's really broken. So in some ways, that kind of self-regulated itself, and that's awesome, right? I wish my players would self-regulate themselves. That's not a thing now. So in some ways it's better, some ways it's worse, and I guess it's just the times, right? So I will say, I think, this is probably bad to say this, but I think I rely on the community for sure to help balance games, all that kind of stuff. 10 years ago, that avenue was both frowned upon and non-existent. So you had to do your due diligence back then and to get the Nintendo seal of approval, right, for a lot of their games. So you had to make sure your game was good, or Nintendo's going to be pisses off at you, and you're not getting something past Nintendo. So in some ways, it has made me a worse designer because I'm like, oh yeah, we'll fix it in post, right? And so that's an interesting kind of like little facet of that as well.
So what bits and pieces of information from the community are you more receptive to? Like if someone's like, this is awful, I need this changed now, or if someone else like, I like this, I wish this was tweaked a little bit to make it feel better.
Yeah, you know, I expect people to be passionate and angry about what they, how they feel about games, right? Games are like very much like comic books, like it's a medium that people fall in love with, and that feeling of getting your first comic book probably is on that same palette of like playing your first game, right? There's just something so primal and like you love it. So I am well aware that people who yell at me are usually just in love with what they're playing. Not always, but sometimes they just yell, like yelling. But so I have to take 2 steps back and realize that what are they actually yelling at me about? Is it because they're losing, right? And is it because their character is super weak? Or is it because I screwed up the numbers somewhere? And so that's the first step, right? Like try to desalivate what they're actually yelling at me about. And then I validate through data, I validate through numbers, and I try to just get to the crux of what they're actually angry about. And then I cross-reference, and I'm like, okay, you know, this person's saying I'm an idiot, and you know, the sword needs to be 20 more points, and I'm like, does anybody else feel like that? Raise your hand, and everybody's like, no, this guy's an idiot. And I'm like, all right, we're on to the next step, let's go. No, but that's one of the ways we use the community, right? I get them on, I get them from the ground level, I get them, and having those dialogues with, I'll have a room of like 40 people, and they'll be like, and one of my superpowers, I'm not the smartest, I'm not the brainiest, I'm not a programmer, I'm not any of these things, but I will say is a good compromise leaves everybody angry, and I try to get in there and be like, okay, the sword, is it broken, is it overpowered? People start screaming. I'm like, how many people would walk away from the table right now if I buff it by 5 points? And they're like, that's fine, I guess you can do that. All right, next topic, right? So giving a little bit, taking away, and all that kind of stuff. And that was my superpower, getting into an angry room and being like, they're not all going to be happy about it, but at least they're going to keep playing the game and they're going to keep giving me feedback. And that was
Yeah. All right, so I want to pass the question back over to George's. Could you tell us about your Buffy series? Is that something that you mentioned earlier in the panel? I wanted you to have an opportunity to talk about it. Is there anything in particular, like any stories in mind that you would have about your time working on Buffy and things like that?
Sure. I mean, enough that'll fill its own hour. To piggyback on something you say, that once it's out there, people then form opinions. Mostly because they either love it or hate it, but they're obviously emotionally involved in whatever it is they're playing or they're doing. I learned that because when I started Buffy, and what Joss Whedon did, the TV show went 7 seasons, for those of you who don't know. The TV show went 7 seasons and very popular and whatever. And then some years later, Joss is feeling, hey, you know, I really want to revisit this, but I'm never going to do another TV show or a movie, because he did the same thing with Firefly. This is something I'd like to approach and like to keep doing. Let's call it season 8. And in his mind, the comic books were going to be canon. Like, this is really what happened after the TV show went off the air. And again, I'm coming at this all very late because I never did watch the show. I did once I got the gig, but I didn't beforehand. I was aware of Buffy through pop culture, but I wasn't personally involved. And when I did become personally involved, I, like you, got a lot of the opinions of people on the internet or wherever, because we did that in 2007, so everything was pretty much still in full swing the way it would be today. And there were so many people. There are things that Buffy did in season 8 because she grows, and I think that was one of the great things about the show. She didn't just stay in high school for 7 years. She actually grew. And here she was still growing, and Joss had grown, we'd grown, everybody had grown up. So she was doing things that I had gotten a lot of letters, I guess because they couldn't reach Joss. What do you do? I'm a little more accessible than Joss. They were saying, I hate this, or they shouldn't have done this, and this is not the case. And you know, I'm every now and again when I would talk to Joss, I'm like, God, Joss, you know, you're doing stuff that people are having some serious opinions about. And he's like, I know, and it happened with the show. The problem there is once you create something, whether it be a video game or a character or whatever, and people become emotionally attached to it, it no longer is your creation. The proprietorship of that now belongs to everybody who has ever felt anything about that particular character, about that particular game. And of course, they have their own opinions, how that should be. Buffy would never do this, or, this would never happen in my world, or how I see it. And Joss was always so very diplomatic. So many people said, you know what, I'm just going to give it up. I'm never going to read Buffy again because you did this. And he'd be very diplomatic and say, we'll miss you. But this is what happened, and that's just the case. People grow and people change, not always for the best. And it's not, you have an idea of who she is, and this is who she is in print. So doing that sort of thing, I always thought you're never going to please everybody, but that's, again, and we've been using this, staying true to your character. That's how you have to do, because you're not always going to be popular. You're not always going to be liked. And that sort of thing is okay. Again, that's fine if that's the case. And with Buffy, there was just a whole lot of fun, because I was, not only did Joss come back, but he invited everyone who ever wrote for the show to come back and write comics. A lot of those people hadn't even written comics before in their lives. But most of them came back, and I can tell you it wasn't for a paycheck, because what you get paid for comics and what you get paid for television, vastly different. And like I said, Joss did very much the same thing. He asked me if I wanted to do a revision of Firefly, and we went ahead and did that, and there were a bunch of naysayers there because of a lot of things that happened. So, I think it's good to stir things up, and if you're doing that, at the very least, you're doing something right.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly I heard this, but I've heard like this mindset philosophy kind of thing, where just because you're the creator of like a character or an IP or something, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're the top authority of how they should act or how the story should go. So what would your thoughts be on?
Well, in this case, Joss was, so whatever he said went. But it's the idea that people who felt they lived with this character for years, and I'm sure everybody, we've all grown up. I mean, I loved The Greatest American Hero when I was a kid and watching it on television. Those things that we vibe to are just so emotionally ingrained in us. And I think that's a good thing, for better or for worse. But we also tend to have an ownership over it. And that's where we are in error. We don't own the character. We are merely passing through all of this. We don't have, that character will be, Star Wars characters will be here long after we're dead.
Yeah.
And that other generation, whoever they are, they'll be looking at it, oh man, that whole Star Wars stuff. These are my opinions, and it'll be different from what we had, and that's fine, and that's just how you have to approach it.
Yeah, with the new viewers comes new perspectives.
Sure, and that's great. And some of them might not like what has gone before, but then that's fine.
I've noticed that too with Star Wars, going back to that again.
Well, episodes 1 through 3 were awful, so I'm sorry, there's just no getting back on that.
No, yeah, but there are, like, in my generation, there are people who didn't really realize, like, the acting, the plot didn't make a lot of sense, but all the lightsaber fights were more dynamic.
Sure,
the
visually,
scenes,
it's way more stunning. No, I mean, the episodes, 8, 9, those were all visual. You see those fight scenes outside in space, I mean, they obviously could have never done that in 77, and I think that should evolve.
Yeah.
But I think you also tend to lose yourself in story, because at the end of the day, if it's not a good story, it's just a lot of pretty pictures.
Yeah.
You're not really thinking, God, that moved me. That's something I really want to revisit. You're like, yeah, that was a cool space fight, but that's it.
And I wonder if there's like a nostalgia factor to that. Like if it's people, like in my generation, they look back fondly on the prequels because, it was all pretty laser fights and whatnot. And I'm wondering if in the next 10 years or so, there are going to be younger kids who are seeing the sequel trilogy now, saying, oh, I like this, I like this, I like this, and then they become sequel fans.
Well, see, nostalgia is actually something that puts you in a place in time. And whatever that nostalgia is that you were watching or doing it at the time, 10 years later, 20 years later, whatever, that's what you remember more than anything. It's more of how the movie made you feel rather than more so what was going on. Because,
right.
You'll forget the details, you'll forget the plot, you'll forget all these things, but you won't forget how it made you feel. And at the end of the day, that nostalgia you feel is that feeling, not so much, because I'm sure you can sit today and watch a movie you saw 20 years ago as a kid and go, oh my God, I love this movie. And you're watching it going, damn, I love this movie and I don't know why because it is so bad. Everybody has that one or whatever films or books and things that they love, and it is for the nostalgia factor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I'm not pushing back on you because I do.
No, please. I invite all opinions.
So this is one thing that I find myself, my personal diverging away from the common thought of nostalgia with red colored glasses and all that kind of stuff. I do think in some ways though, you can get it right the first time, or at least get it right the first 3 times, right? And I think that transcends nostalgia in that those rare occasions. And I think Buffy, and I think when Luke's looking over the Tatooine and the sun's rise up in the background, and I think in some ways it'll transcend nostalgia. I look back at Firefly
because it's how it made you feel. It wasn't that it was such a great scene; it was just that feeling at the time.
But I just push back on that because if I watch it again, and maybe there is feelings there, but I'll watch some of the new stuff or I'll play some of the new games, and I'll play it, and I have to check myself and say, do I love it because it's nostalgia, or do I love it because it was just made with a certain something where I feel potentially the newer generation doesn't have. And so for video games, especially in the PS2 era, in a world where an artist wasn't influenced by the outside ecosystem, and in a lot of ways, it was a brick wall between what the community wanted and what the artist was making. I don't know, I'll go back and I'll be like, I can see, it feels different, and I don't know, I don't know what it is, I can't put it in my hands, I can't morph it in my hand, but sometimes I do go back and watch old animes from like 1989, there was a Berserk, and I'm just like, there's a reason why people still talk about this 1989 anime, and because it had that thing, it had that special spark.
I think initially it has to, because I feel that way about Speed Racer.
Okay,
This was
yeah.
in the 60s, this was Japanese in the 60s, and I've been rewatching some of them today, and oh my God, they're so bad.
Sure.
In terms of they're not pandering, it's very information based, but I totally excuse the animation because of course you're a product of your times. If this was the 60s, this is what they could do in the 60s and 70s and whatnot. But the reason I watch it and fondly remember is because of where I was at that time. It came on early, and I would never get up before school for anything, but they showed it right before school. So I got up early just to watch this show for probably a year. And that, I have to say, when I think of Speed Racer or go to a con and see toys and whatnot, that's that nostalgia hitting me.
For what you do though, do you feel like at any point when making comics, do you feel like the new generation maybe has forgotten something of the past as far as like by hand or?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I think even more than that. Nowadays, writers are very lazy because everything used to be single issues back in the day.
Sure.
Because there used to be ongoing issues, like the Fantastic Four was on issue 400 for a reason because they had 400 issues previous. Now it's 1 through 6, issue 1, a mini-series, a maxi-series, this and that. So you don't get any time anymore to really establish, and this is what comics were very much, the soap opera of everything. There were drama and events happening in people's lives that weren't necessarily the focus in every issue, but you would always come back to it. And I guarantee you, for whatever TV shows you love that are ongoing, you'll see those subplots, and very much in Buffy, playing in and out of themselves. And you don't see that anymore. And now, what somebody would have written one issue for, 22 pages, now they have 5 issues. They have 100 pages.
So to my
point,
if I picked up on that, what you feel is so strongly like how they used to do it in the past, would that be a credit for me to say, like, I actually really liked how they used to do it on that, where you got more drama and more fleshed out storylines, where nowadays it feels so rushed?
Yeah, well, I think that's highly subjective too, because you feel what you feel. I'm not here to tell you how you feel. I'm not saying, no, what you read was bullshit, it was never any good. But something like, hypothetically, The Watchmen, which is a mini-series, but it is so dense. There are very few mini-series where you read it going, this is enough. Yeah. I don't need 100 more issues. I didn't need, fewer issues. This was enough of what the story was to tell me what I needed to know and make me feel whatever it was I was feeling. And I think writers today just don't have that in them. They'll spend 3 pages on Wolverine looking at the sunset and thinking, okay, I'm gonna have to go kill those ninjas now. Whereas if it was a single issue or something, he would have done that in a page.
Yeah.
And then they would have gone on to do whatever it is they do. And as an artist, I see this. I've literally drawn comics where I'm like, why is this scene taking 10 pages? There is no reason for this scene to take 10 pages. And of course it's like a mini-series, so, oh, that's because there's 5 issues. That's why it's taking. Then as a reader, because I still read comics and I love comics, I'm really losing interest. And you did this by issue 2. So by issue 4, I don't know if I'm still picking up this book, because issue 2 really started to make me feel like I'm losing you.
Yeah.
And that's just the way comics are nowadays. It's a sad, but it's a truism.
Yeah, gotcha.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just love asking that question. Is it because of I like things in the past because of rose-colored glasses, or is there something there that there was magic? And it's an open-ended question. I know.
Yeah, sometimes there is, and sometimes there
And
isn't.
I love.
But that magic is different for everyone.
For sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that, the discussion of nostalgia could be its own panel.
Sure. Yeah. yeah, for sure.
But do we have any questions out in the audience?
As we run over,
Yeah, I think we're about on time. We might have about 5 minutes left, give or take.
all the way in the back there.
In the back.
Any of those people, folks, could you move out of the way and give him time to speak?
Please, one at a time at the microphone.
Yeah, we've got 2 mics on either side. If you can take time.
I was just gonna say that I watched like Fox and the Hound recently, and I thought it was like my favorite movie ever.
Disney.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a cute
And then when I
movie.
watched it again, it was way darker than I thought it was back then. And I was like, wait, what is this? So.
But did you enjoy it
I still
any
enjoyed
less
it. It was just like
as a result?
I guess a tad bit less, but it was still enjoyable though. I was just baffled how dark it really was.
Yeah, and in some ways, as you get older, right, those darker undertones, maybe you did lose a friend, right? And so
Yeah.
that speaks to you even more. And,
Maybe that's the case. Yeah. Oh wait, actually.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
I'm thinking, and yeah, that's probably the case. So yeah.
So I guess it's another. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I have a question.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh,
question.
okay. So the whole thing, this originally was about, I guess, not ruining your career with social media.
Oh, yeah. We
Just
the hell
We
out of
had
that.
fun.
to bring it back around a bit. I don't know if you got to this part in the beginning, because I was in the beginning, but, sorry.
Kind of.
So, what are your thoughts on redemption and how one can come back? Because I've noticed in social media, people are very unforgiving in a way that's unnatural for most humans.
Yeah, sure.
And this is a whole other panel, because I have such issues with this cancel culture.
Oh, yeah.
It bothers the hell out of me.
Yeah, it's one thing that I've noticed is that people have very short memories, like very, very short memories. I've seen, on a Tuesday this person said this, and then on a Thursday they're the best person ever, and it's just. And in some way, but there's no one-size-fits-all to any kind of situation. I've also seen where somebody's made a mistake, and then 10 years later, they're like, you're still a horrible person because you did this thing back in 1995. And you're like, whoa, what can I do? I said, I'm sorry. That's a hard one. That's a very, very hard one. At the end of the day, owning the mistakes that you can make and say, I messed up on this, and just, for me, it's about your persona that you create online. I've made plenty of mistakes. Now I have, in the 90s, this is a horrible thing to say, right? In the 90s, the vernacular that people used were completely different than the vernacular that people use today, right? And in some ways that's great, right?
Reference to what?
So, you couldn't go 10 feet in the 90s without somebody on the playground saying, oh, you're such a F-word faggot, right? And that kind of vernacular is horrible.
No, we did that in the 70s.
Yeah, and so, but to deny that it's not a thing and pretend like we didn't all say it and stuff like that, it does everyone a disservice, right? And now I don't.
Well, now you're talking politically correctness.
Sure.
That's different.
Sure. And but to pretend like I didn't say that, or if somebody caught me saying it or whatever, I'd be like, yeah, I used to use words like that, but that's not a thing I say now. I've kind of grown up, and I have better words to describe the things that I hate or think they're stupid or whatever. Trying to go away from that and try to, instead of being like, we didn't say that, I think that's the wrong way to go about it. Own it. And I am who I am, right? And I like the things that I like, and nobody's gonna tell me what I am gonna like or how I can't speak and stuff like that. So I own my consequences, and I own the things that I say, and it'll all shake out. And also, as much as it is real, Twitter's not real. It is real, but it's not, right? If you live and die by the sword, that is the Twitter hanging over your head. Treat people with respect, and I'm not going to preach at the camera for 2 people, but treat people with respect, and it'll come back to you. Right? And so, getting canceled on a Tuesday, then everybody loves you on a Thursday, sometimes that just happens. So, hopefully I answered your question. I don't want to jump on a soapbox.
I'm a very big believer that profanity or being profane, and somebody once said this, is the language of the uneducated. And I firmly believe that, because if you have an opinion, everybody's got an opinion, and we've been talking about that here, that's fine. It's how you articulate that opinion. And the idea that you can't lend somebody else's opinion as much weight as yours is fine, but at least give them the respect that that is their opinion and that you don't agree with that, which is, I think right now, very timely with our next president coming up, whoever that may be. But the idea of canceling somebody because you don't agree with what and again, using the presidency as an example, I've heard people either, I'm going to unfriend you if you vote one way, or I'm going to leave the country if, whatever happens, happens. And I'm thinking, seriously? That's your whole life has been spent here, and you're going to leave the country for 4 years because of that? And if you do, that's up to you. Or if you don't like this person, that's up to you. But I think we've gotten so extreme in the internet and all of the social media stuff because there is an air of anonymity that shields us to the point that we are the strongest people in the world. If you don't know who I am or you don't know how to get a hold of me, I can say anything I want and I don't agree with that. You should be accountable for what you say. Everybody should be out there saying, if I don't believe you or if I don't agree with you, at least tell me that and give me the idea or the chance to rebuttal, or at least meet you face to face on common ground and that sort of thing. I think that's one of the idea that reference is so good and easy in media. That is probably one of the worst things about social media and the internet these days, is that we can be as mean as we want, we can be as strong as we want, and we can be as weak as we want, and we can be as bad as we want. And there's no accountability for that, and I think that's just wrong.
So I think we're about out of time. This will be my final question for the both of you.
Sure.
Since we're talking about the cancel culture and being behind the anonymity wall, what could we as individuals do to kind of bring ourselves closer to each other, have a better understanding of how we feel, start to build a more respectful, community amongst, each other?
Yeah. Okay. Me personally, I always try to give the benefit of the doubt of somebody who's yelling at me or disagrees with me and stuff like that. I always try to say, like, okay, whatever, this person said this about me. I'm not instantly going to take it to their horrible, disgusting, vile individual. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, oh, maybe they're having a bad day, right? Or maybe we just don't disagree. So I think right off the bat, if you think every single person against you is an enemy, the world's going to look like a very scary, angry place, right? And then my second rule of thumb is sign my name on my tweets and stuff like that, because I own it. Like, that's me. I try to get away from the anonymity he spoke of earlier. And then second, it's just treat people with respect, all right? And like, I wouldn't, if I would say it to your face, if I was standing in front of you, I'll probably can say it online. And that has usually saved me, right, in a lot of things, right? And I wish people would treat me the same way. Like, I would punch you in the face. I'm like, would you though? Like, come on! But,
well, then you just think, well, what are the consequences?
Exactly.
It's a misdemeanor, it's a crime, I can call the police.
Exactly, yeah.
I used to be a youth minister years and years ago, and I was talking to the kids, and the one thing I would impart, or they told us to impart, was just be accountable. You can say, nobody's up here saying you can't say what you want, but just understand whatever it is you're saying, you're going to have to be accountable for. If you say, I hate black people, if I hate Jews, then be accountable for that. Don't just sort of hide behind this other shield of, well, that's just my freedom of right, and the amendment gives me that right to say what I want. Yes, it does, but it also allows you to be anonymous, and I think that's where the problems and the strengths of the internet come in, where as long as we don't have to be accountable for what we do, we can say anything we want, and that shouldn't be the case.
Josh, wait to make the firefly too.
I mean, yeah, that's a whole nother panel. So.
You know the guy. Can you put a good word?
That's a whole nother panel.
Awesome.
All right, I think that's, oh, we're way over time. All right, cool. So thank you very much, Thor, Georges. It was nice to have you here.
All right.
You're welcome.
And thank you, everybody, for being here.
Yes.